Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, December the 30th, 2021. Just a heads up, in about 90 minutes, I will be discussing John Sturgis's masterpiece, The Great Escape. But first off, how do you know about the world you live in, the way we live now? Sometimes it just drops into your lap. And this is the occasion here with a story at the Atlantic, or the Jobs' widow blog, as I like to call it, called How I Demolished My Life, a home improvement story by Honor Jones. Honor Jones, you say? Sounds kind of made up, right? Well, I checked this person out at Muckrack. It says Honor Jones, senior features editor, The Atlantic, senior The Atlantic, The New York Times, Gulf News, Virginia Quarterly Review. Oh, look, a year ago, there's a story, The Speech of Joe Biden's Life, because he's made so many memorable speeches that it'd be hard, to pick just one out. Then I see that Honor Jones is linked to some mystery meat woman called Flora Zhang, described as a senior managing editor at Palo Alto Twix, or some such thing. Also, CNN Opinion, New York Times. That is to say, I don't know whether Honor Jones is an actual person. There were pictures provided of a shrewish looking woman, seemingly going out of her way to look like that woman that everyone says, stay away from her. She's trouble, and not in a good way. Anyway, the story begins. I had wanted, I thought, soapstone counters and a farmhouse sink. I had wanted an island and a breakfast nook and two narrow vertical cabinets on either side of the stove. One could be for cutting boards and one could be for baking sheets. I followed a cabinetry company called Plain English on Instagram because, of course, that's what one does, and screenshotted its pantries, which came in paint colors like kipper and boiled egg. Plain English cost a fortune, but around a corner in the back of its New York showroom, you could check out the budget version called British Standard, but it cost a fortune too. I wish there was a budget British Standard. I wish there was a room behind that room, the cabinets getting flimsier and flimsier until the door opened and let me back into my own shitty American kitchen, just as it was. So we see right from the start here that we're dealing with a bug man, or in this case, a bug woman, who is wealthy, but not as wealthy as she would like to be. My husband talked to the architect, my husband talked to the builder, and I kept paring the plans down, making them cheaper, making them simpler. I nixed the island and found a stainless steel work table at a restaurant supply store online for $299. I started fantasizing about replacing the counters with 2x4s on sawhorses and hanging the pots from nails on the wall. Slowly, I realized I didn't want this kitchen. Slowly, I realized I didn't want this life. I didn't want to renovate. I wanted to get divorced. Yes. So, in the old days, or cliche days today, women get divorced because their husbands beat them, or emotionally abusive, drug addicts, drunks, gamblers, etc. But increasingly, we find that women want to get divorced because, I don't know, maybe there's something better out there. Well, maybe, depending on how you look and how old you are and such like. Women getting divorced is a fascinating topic. If some of you might remember the blog called Dalrock, where this evangelical conservative talked about women and the real stories of why women got divorced. And it was just, I don't know, just like kind of, sort of, like maybe, what, really? I'm not justifying, male divorce, except that uh, I'm told that up to 90% of divorces now are initiated by women. Man decides, I want a version of my wife that's 20 years younger. Okay, I can kind of understand that. Oh, and perhaps the main reason is not just the youth and the beauty and such like, but yeah, my wife knows me back before I was something, so I can't, keep up airs. But no, the kind of sort of, I don't know, yeah, I had a dream kitchen in mind and it didn't work out, so I want to get divorced. What? Anyway, to continue from Honor Jones. For a while, I thought I was quite certain that I loved our home. It was a mushroomy white with peeling gray shutters, which sounds unappealing but looked just right in the green Pennsylvania clearing where it sat. It had a big fireplace for Christmas stockings and more than enough room for our 3 kids to grow up. Ooh, 3 kids. How about that? Even that kitchen, which had the ambiance of an alley and filled with smoke every time I cooked, bothered me more in theory than in practice. There was no counter space, and the light above the sink suffered from some sort of electrical issue. No matter how many times we replaced the bulb, it flickered and went out. Maybe you could have called an electrician in, and for a couple $100, you wouldn't have to have spent, tens of thousands to redo your kitchen. But the upkeep, oh my God, the upkeep. I hired a woman named Luba to clean once a week. I loved talking with her. She was full of sensible advice, like how I should really stop washing the cleaning rags along with the children's clothes because the chemicals could irritate their skin. She was likewise full of conspiracy theories and evangelical religion. She was worried about microchips in COVID-19 vaccines. Humanity had a few more years, she thought, probably 7. Then, apocalypse. Even with Luba's help, the house was chaos. I could never keep the children and their mess corralled. Toys and books were always underfoot. The crumbs, they were everywhere. I knew I was lucky to have all these crumbs in the house to keep them in, to have Luba to help. Still, if our kitchen became a murder scene, a forensic investigator could have told the story of my days with those crumbs. They were 3% Play Doh, 10% toast, 87% Honey Nut Cheerios dust. This was who I was. So apparently, it was too much for this masterful woman to set some rules for her children. For instance, pick up your toys and your books and take them back to where they belong. And you don't eat everywhere. You eat at the kitchen table. Is that really so hard for a mother to do? Apparently, it is impossible now because I don't know what you'd be harshening their buzz or whatever. And if you really wanted to go all out, you could tell your children that we have set meal times in our home. Like breakfast, lunch, dinner, etc. But again, too much, too much. Honor Jones continues, I would vacuum whenever there were so many crumbs that I'd brush them from my bare feet before getting into bed. I dislike the work of vacuuming, the tripping cord, the dumb bumping around sofa legs. The pain, the pain. But I like the sound of the sucked up crumbs, that little clatter. After, for about 7 minutes, the house could have belonged to anyone, a flight attendant, a bachelor, a Russian oligarch. Then another Cheerio would fall to the floor. I've heard of the water torture, but never the Cheerio torture before. But, live and learn. There's an essay I love called Making House by Rachel Cusk. She wrote about a friend of hers who runs her house with admirable laxity. In the kitchen, you feel a distinct crunching sensation from the debris underfoot. Guests generally don't like that sort of thing. Does she not know this? It's one thing to live in squalor in your own home, but one gets used to it, But in other people's homes, no. The children's rooms are so neglected that they have acquired a kind of wilderness beauty, like untouched landscapes. This mother feels no shame about the mess. She's free. And I want it to be like that, to make the home instead of the home making me. But the crumbs got me down. Excuse me. I sometimes felt that they were a metaphor, that as I got older, I was being ground down under the heel of my own life. All I could do was settle into the carpet. I didn't have a secret life, but I had a secret dream life, which might have been worse. I loved my husband. It's not that I didn't. But I felt that he was standing between me and the world, between me and myself. Everything I experienced, relationships, reality, my own understanding of my identity and desires was filtered through him before I could access them. The worst part was that it wasn't remotely his fault. This is probably exactly what I asked him to do when we were 21 and first in love, even if I never said it out loud, to shelter me from the elements, to be caring and broad shouldered. But now it was like I was always on my tiptoes trying to see around him. I couldn't see, but I could imagine. I started imagining other lives, other homes. What is it with divorced women and real estate? After the terrible conversation when I told my husband how I felt and that I didn't think I could change how I felt, I read Dana Spiotta's new book, Wayward, about a woman who realizes she wants to leave her marriage only after she impulsively buys a fixer-upper. I'd read Deborah Levy's Real Estate, about imagining into existence a home of her own after her children are grown and gone. Meanwhile, I called the real estate agent who sold us our house to tell her that we probably needed to put it back on the market. And she told me all about her own divorce, how long she stayed, how hard it was to go, and how she still, decades later, sometimes wondered whether it was the right thing to do. Don't worry about the house, she said. It'll sell. This happens all the time. I wanted to be thinking about art and sex and politics and the patriarchy. I don't know, lady. I don't know, lady. Maybe you should have thought a little more about your husband and your three little kitties. She continues, how much of my life, I mean, the architecture of my life, but also its essence, my soul, my mind, had I built around my husband? Who could I be if I wasn't his wife? Maybe I would microdose. Maybe I would have sex with women. Maybe I would write a book, not a book about real estate. I have to remind you, listeners, that this is an actual essay that appeared yesterday in The Atlantic by a supposedly real woman that is supposedly not a parody. But back to Honor Jones. But there wasn't time to think about the big questions. My soon to be ex husband and I agreed we had to get out of Pennsylvania. It was too painful. Neither of us could bear to sleep in the house. We decided to move back to New York, where we'd lived when we were younger and where our friends and work and community still were. We had to rent apartments and fill them with the bare minimum clothes and Legos. We had to get the kids registered for daycare and school before September. We had to sell the house. I split the knives and forks in half. I packed 2 pots, 2 pans, the coffee maker, and a cookie sheet that turned out to be too big for the new apartment's tiny oven. That may be the saddest thing that I've ever heard. I'd been pregnant or nursing for most of the past 7 years and had finally lost all that baby weight. So my closet was full of drapey clothes that no longer fit. I gave them to Luba, and she mailed them to a church in Ukraine. Luba sounds like a much, much nicer woman than Honor Jones. I sold the dining room table. My mom took the nursery rocking chair. I emptied the fridge and pulled the trash cans to the curb. That life was gone. I hadn't needed to renovate a kitchen. I'd spent 7 years renovating myself. My children, my 3 pregnancies, a literal gut renovation, a major addition and then a subtraction, and the strange, misshapen aftermath. The giant boobs of breastfeeding that seemed borrowed from another woman's body entirely and were eventually returned to the mothers of the universe. Oh my God, that is terrible writing. And then the whole thing again and again. And now finally, my own winnowed older body, which still seems foreign to me. I had been a house for my family, and now I was empty. We moved the kids into a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Their father and I split our time between the kids' place and the one-bedroom garden apartment that friends of ours owned nearby, 2 nights on, 2 nights off. This setup is called nesting, a cute word for a depressing arrangement, but it was cheaper than having two bigger apartments, and we hoped it would make the transition easier on the kids. There were days when the magnitude of what I'd done bore down on me. I kept wondering if I'd feel regret or remorse. It is hard to admit this. It makes me cold. As cold a woman as my ex-husband suspects I am. Now we're finally getting the husband's point of view. But I didn't. It felt raw, and I liked it. There was nothing between me and the world. It was as if I'd been wearing sunglasses and then taken them off, and suddenly everything looked different. Not better, or worse, just clearer, harsher, cold wind on my face. I had caused so much upheaval, so much suffering, and for what? He asked me that at first again and again. For what? So I could put my face in the wind, so I could see the sun's glare. I didn't say that out loud. But houseless, husbandless, half the nights childless, I'd never felt so exposed, out there on the cliff face of single life. I tried to pretend I wasn't scared, but I was. Twice, trying to keep track of the kids in the park by myself, I lost my oldest son. He ran ahead to the playground, and I lost him. I looked and then shouted his name, and then I panicked. One time, someone else's husband finally helped me find him. Honey, help that poor woman, his wife probably told him. They felt sorry for me, and I didn't care. I was abject with gratitude. I knelt and took my son's shoulders in my hands and shook him gently and talked in my serious, quaking voice about how we needed to be safer. At that moment, I missed acutely the comforts of our Pennsylvania yard, the quiet street, the swing set that was only our own. Last summer, there was a fawn in our backyard day after day in the tall grass. A doe will leave her baby while she forages, and the baby will stay right there, perfectly camouflaged, until she finally comes back, her mouth stuffed with clover. The fawn was so fragile, I could hardly bear to look at it. My son is only 6. He doesn't know the worst that can happen. I don't want him to know. Do I? I admire his confidence, but sometimes I wonder if he could use a little more of that animal intelligence, by which I mean, I guess, fear. Yeah, how long before one or two or three of Honor Jones's children's transition? But back to the text. By late fall, to my huge relief, we had an offer on our house. When the deal went through, my ex and I agreed that we could afford our own separate places. I started to wonder, what would I do with the apartment when it became my apartment? Up until then, the space had been blank and partial. It hadn't seemed right to decorate, to hang anything on the walls, as long as the kid's father and I were sharing it. I had exerted so much of my will on his world already. Besides, I wanted to let go of the idea that the home I made defined me, that I was made more real by homemaking. And yet, there was a truth to it. So much of homemaking is plainly material, dishwasher pods and blackout curtains and crumb control, but so much is storytelling. Maybe what I really wanted was new things, things only I had chosen, things that would make my hidden self come into view. I was a little embarrassed about this. It felt hypocritical. Still, gazing at the future, I bought a few prints. One was an illustration of a man gazing up at a giant wall of cubbies, like at a museum gift shop or a nursery school. The cubbies were filled with objects, a nautilus, a hat, a small volcano. It was called Everything in Its Right Place. I kept it under the toddler's crib, because that's what one does with prints, right? We told the kids what was up, and the older two seemed to understand. Mom would have a place, and Dad would have a place, and both places would be theirs. We would all be just a few minutes apart, I said. This would be convenient, obviously, but I felt strongly about it for a deeper reason. I wanted them to feel at home in both apartments, but even more so, I wanted them to feel at home in the blocks between. Oh my God, could this woman possibly any more pretentious? To feel part of their neighborhood, of the public school and the park and the sidewalks and the city beyond. By breaking up our family, I'd taken something from my kids that they were never going to get back. Hmm. Naturally, I've thought about this a lot. Perhaps you should have thought about it before you did it. There was nothing I could give them to make up for it, except maybe a way of being in the world, of being open to it and open in it. The kids didn't care about soapstone counters or what kind of hinges were on their cabinets. More and more, I understood that what I wanted for them was public, not private spaces. Maybe they would know from the beginning, in a way I hadn't, that they didn't have to own the playground to share it. Monkey bars polished by thousands of hands, the secret shaded rooms under the slides, the parents filling water balloons for any passing children. Gewalt. All that fall, we barely went home. We lived from playground to park on a diet of peanut butter sandwiches and ice cream truck soft serve. Not good for the digestion. Just a suggestion there. On my nights alone, I caught up with old friends, frantically made new friends, said way too much about my personal life over drinks with colleagues. Out in the city, I felt solid, a capable woman taking care of her family. It was harder to hold on that confidence inside the home, where I guess I still expected a husband to be. One day, walking down the street, my oldest asked me, "Mom, do you have any fantasies?" Because, of course, that's what a child would say to his mother. I stalled. I have fantasies, but they're sort of personal. Do you have any fantasies? Yeah, he said, sure. Like a horseshoe is good luck. Yeah, because of course that conversation actually happened. I laughed, but it made sense. He'd mixed up fantasy and superstition. I often felt in those months that there was something fantastic about our lives, that by uprooting us from the solidity of the house, I had made us freer, but also somehow less real. Secretly, by not having a husband, I suspected I was getting away with something. I had an irrational fear that if I lost my temper at the kids, or struggled to make rent, or drank too much white wine, or even admitted that I was having a really hard time, the marriage police would knock on my door. Sorry, ma'am, they'd say, you just can't hack it. They'd hand me my summons. I'd have to go crawling back to Pennsylvania. In December, I did have to go back to Pennsylvania. It was the week of the closing date, and I had to clean out the last of our things. I'd left at the end of summer, and now the trees were bare, but the place looked as beautiful as ever. People have so many superstitions about happy homes, so many traditions. The horseshoe above the entryway, the mezuzah by the door. Here's another. No one wants to buy a house where something sad has happened. One of the first pieces of advice our real estate agent gave us, that no one needed to know that our marriage was ending. We'll just say you're moving for work, she told me, which, to be clear, was also true. Living in New York was better for our careers. Make sure your husband keeps some clothes in the closet, she said. I get what people are afraid of, but the ghost of my marriage doesn't live in that house. Those stones are almost 200 years old. They stood through way more storms than mine. The ghost of my marriage, if it lives at all, lives with me, following me around drearily, shooting me sad looks. Like my mother, it casts a disappointed eye around the small apartment, at the empty walls, asking, really? Inside the house, I tackled the closets first. I took out the blazers, the shirts, and ties hanging there so symbolically. Symbolically? Well, why are they symbolic? They're practical, actually. It occurred to me that this might be the last time I would ever fold his clothes. I tried to do it gently. I thought I would do some writing there, box up the things, and then let out my feelings. But the packing took hours, and by 9 at night, my back was killing me, and the movers would be there so early in the morning. I lay down in the dark house, and like I had for so many years as a wife, wrote nothing. The next day, back in Brooklyn, I decorated for Christmas. We didn't have a fireplace anymore, so I nailed some twine to the wall behind a couch and hung the stockings there. Then I rushed out to buy a tree. I never thought it would be hard to carry it by myself, but it wasn't, not very. I screwed it into the stand and strung the lights and ran out of time to vacuum the needles. Walking the kids back from after school care in the blue December dark, I said there was a surprise at home. They ran ahead and stopped short outside our building. They looked at the tree glowing in the window, and I looked at them. Maybe I'm deluding myself. Maybe I'm not free of anything, and I just want different objects, a different home. Maybe someday, admit it, a different man. Maybe I'm starting the same story all over again. For what? You'd ask me, and you'd be right. But I don't think so. I think I'm making something new. Honor Jones is a senior editor at The Atlantic. That is to say, if Honor Jones actually exists. This is what our civilization has been for, to produce women like Honor Jones, who decides to destroy her life and wreck her children's lives? Because, I don't know, I'm not really, this whole kitchen thing has gotten out of control, and it's made me think about, this is what we've been reduced to? Let's go to the chat. Okay, hello to Zen Master Football Analysis, a new name to me. Hello to Anran, Picasso88, William Hicks. Picasso88 says, hopefully KMG makes his own great escape soon. Golly, I sure hope so. Hello to Sam B, a Dan, a David Wright, who says rule by Pajits equals no heat. I'm afraid on Twitter last night, I might have got a little spare, as they say in England. Hello to British American, Brandon Smith, David Wright. Brandon Smith says, I live alone and the crushing loneliness is well worth it. David Wright says, my roommate thinks she is my wife. Looked at True Greenbird. No, this is not a parody. No, it is not. Brandon Smith says, women have divorced themselves from being able to defer gratification, so bail out to collect cash and prizes at the first sign of having to endure anything. I don't know. It sounds that this house that they had in Pennsylvania, it seems rather idyllic. And one gets the impression that, Honor Jones, maybe I don't deserve this. Well, perhaps you could just take some pleasure in the circumstances in which you find yourself. How about that? Brandon Smith again, they wonder why other men don't want them either. Metal Mike says, I think Luba's on to something. Dan says her emotional and physical labor is through the roof. Jokin666 says, that was my nanny's name as a baby. I loved her, Ukrainian lady. Dan Allison says, life is chaos. Living alone changes nothing in that regard. Sounds like a lazy woman who just hates putting things in order. Oh, Metal Mike, yes, I thought of this too. Also a successful recording artist, 1980s from Canada, Luba. British American says, most divorces, as we all know, are initiated by women, and the most common reason, no doubt, I'm bored. I'm unhappy. Jokin666 asks, is this journalism? Well, yeah, it is, because we know what journalism is. Because it's about obnoxious women telling us about their feelings. I mean, assuming this Honor Jones person is real, and assuming that she's actually, maybe I can become a lesbian now. Okay, well, maybe she will. But assuming that she is interested in another man, any man who happens to come across this story will say, oh my God, I'm not having anything to do with her. I dodged a bullet there. I'm unfulfilled, says Picasso88. Okay, who else do we have here? Sounds like her and her agent have many evenings of box wine ahead of them, says Dan. I saw this joke recently on a site that I'm not supposed to mention. But the idea was for a boxed wine that was called, Yes, I'm That Woman. Because apparently women say that. Popcasso88 says KMG would make an excellent audiobook narrator. Dr. Deadname says, why are uninteresting people paid to write about themselves? I find myself, on this live stream, feeling like I'm Alan Partridge, And if you've ever seen Alan Partridge narrate someone else's stories, I found that I've sort of found myself in that slot. That's how I say this. Don Willis says, "My, how the Atlantic has fallen way back in the day. Some decent articles. Everything has been ruined by our enemies." William Hicks says, "My name is Luba. I live on the second floor." Hello to Denny McDougall. Hi, Kevin from Chicago. Just waiting to set another year-end murder record. Mayor Lightfoot must have a heavy heart, says Brandon Smith. We call her Mayor Beetlejuice around here. British American says, "Whenever I catch myself desiring something typical, something cringe, I tell myself that the line forms over there and it's a long one." Brandon Smith says, "As an ordinary tradesman, I see this all the time." Picasso 88 says, in 1994, The Atlantic ran a decent review of Camp of the Saints, and in 1999, they published Greg Cochrane's theory that homosexuality is caused by a virus. Yeah, well, I've never bought that. I've never bought that hypothesis. Does a virus seek sterility? Doesn't make any sense to me. Doe, a deer, a female deer. Ray, who used to be my son, says William Hicks. Dr. Deadname says, vis-a-vis journalism, you could send a grizzled, intrepid reporter into a war zone to interview a rebel commander, or you could find some neurotic housewife down the street to write about herself. True Greenbird says, "Who is her audience? You would think other divorced women possibly, but no, actually, her audience is her therapist. Her audience is always her therapist." Hello to French Ferret, SP1P3. Okay, new name to me. How did they get past an editor? Well, the editor was a woman, perhaps 10 or 20 years older than Honor Jones. It's like that episode of 30 Rock when Liz runs into this comedy writer who had been her idol when she was young. And it was played by Carrie Fisher. And this woman is an absolute nightmare. She convinces Liz to quit her job. And, they're going to write a screenplay about some 50-year-old writer who has sex with hot 20-year-old black men. And Liz says, "Oh, my God, I quit my job." Best bit. They're walking through this horrible neighborhood in New York City. And she says, "Where are we?" And Carrie Fisher says, "Little Chechnya." And then Liz says, "Does that man have a gun?" And Carrie Fisher says, "Don't worry, he's not a policeman." British American says, Thomas Carlyle had a good face slap for the likes of this woman. "Consider that thou art likely to be damned," by which he meant you have a lot more serious things to worry about. Hello to Red Sulfur. Oscar To says, "Feelings aren't necessarily bad to share. For instance, it would be nice to hear one of these ladies share their feelings about fulfillment in marriage for once and love for her kids." Don Willis says, "She has armpit hair. You know it." Women are better behaved in Chechnya, says Red Sulfur. Okay. So we're done with Honor Jones or Flora Zhang or whatever her name is. Okay. Let's talk about chestnut trees. Let's talk about chestnut trees in America. I was unaware of this until today. This is from Grizz on Twitter at Cubsjaw. "The American chestnut was once the most important and valuable tree in eastern North America. Now it is nearly extinct. This is the story of how an invasive species killed off this special tree, and in the process helped exterminate self-sufficient agrarian life in Appalachia. The American chestnut, Castanea dentata, is a hardwood tree native to eastern North America. It is considered the finest chestnut tree in the world. Growing up to 17 feet wide and up to 120 feet tall, old chestnuts were among the most stunning specimens in the eastern forest. When European settlers arrived in the New World, the American chestnut was likely the most common tree they encountered. In some areas of Appalachia, nearly 1 in 2 trees in any given forest was an Appalachian chestnut. The earliest use of the chestnut was probably as a fencing wood. Few woods split easier and straighter while being as light and durable. Early colonial settlers built Virginia rail fences out of chestnut, which required no posts and lasted a lifetime. It was unsurpassed as a building material because it grew straight and was highly rot resistant, insect proof, and weather resistant. Some grew so large that an entire cabin was constructed from a single tree in Tennessee. And pictured is a cabin made of mostly American chestnut. Its uses go far beyond just building, though. Chestnuts are highly nutritious and were a staple in the diet of animals in the region, providing most of the fall food for wildlife such as the white-tailed deer, wild turkey, and the now extinct passenger pigeon. Humans also frequently consumed chestnuts. With the first frost in October, children were often sent to the woods to collect sacks of chestnuts, which were either roasted or brought by wagon to country stores to be sold or exchanged for other commodities. And there's lots of pictures in this tweet storm here of people posed next to chestnut trees to just show just how enormous they were. The chestnuts roasting on an open fire would produce a delightful aroma that spread through the hills. In the 1800s to early 1900s, you could hardly walk through Appalachian hollows in the fall and winter without smelling chestnuts baking in people's homes. Similarly, many parts of the American chestnut tree were used as medicine. The Cherokee used leaves to alleviate heart troubles, and the sprouts were sometimes made into a tea to treat sores and wounds. The nuts were also used to treat ailments such as whooping cough. Hogs were easy to raise in the mountains as they came to roam free in the woods to feast on the abundance of chestnuts littering the forest floor. Mountain pork, which had a special flavor from their chestnut diet, became a highly sought-after commodity. The American chestnut allowed farmers to raise livestock at virtually no cost for many months out of the year by applying one of the earliest forms of silvopasture in America. By having chestnut trees, rural people had money and meat on the table for centuries. Hollows in old-growth chestnut trees were massive. One account from an early ranger in the Smoky Mountains said of a large chestnut, a man lost some stalk during a snowstorm and later found them safe in a hollow chestnut tree. Life among those trees was looking up. Around the turn of the 20th century, an invasive pest known as the chestnut blight was introduced to American chestnut trees in New York City through shipments of Chinese chestnuts from East Asia. It spread rapidly as the American chestnut had no resistance to the pest. Spreading at an astounding rate of 50 miles a year, it took only 30 years to eradicate most of the American chestnuts in the eastern U.S. Approximately 4 billion chestnut trees were killed by the late 1930s. Farmers and woodlot owners were encouraged to harvest the remaining chestnut trees quickly, as their value decreased rapidly upon deterioration. This may have sped up the extinction process, as trees with a small amount of blight resistance may have been killed off. When chestnuts began dying off in large droves, many locals thought the entire ecosystem was dying. In a way, they were right. Turkeys began disappearing, and squirrel numbers decreased to a tenth of what they were before. Black bears never seemed to get as fat as they used to. Many organisms relied entirely on the American chestnut tree to survive. At least 7 native moths became extinct in southern Appalachia, including the American chestnut moth. Life without chestnuts was almost unthinkable. The tree had been so deeply connected to life in Appalachia for centuries. No longer able to raise hogs and cattle in the woods or gather chestnuts for sale, rural people increasingly looked to the urban center for salvation. It became much more difficult to maintain a self-sufficient agrarian life in the mountains. As industrialization rapidly expanded, the death of the chestnut seemed to extinguish mountain folks' last hope in maintaining life as they had known it for 4 centuries. In the years since, biologists and foresters have been attempting to crossbreed and modify the chestnut to improve its resistance to the blight. Many of these projects were abandoned by the 1960s, but some still remain today. Unfortunately, the damage has already been done. Today, most Appalachians do not remember life among these trees. Despite it being such an important part of our history, we will never again experience the true glory of the American chestnut, RIP. And again, this is a tweet storm from a Twitter user, Grizz at Cubs Jaw. Ah, yes, invasive species. Ain't diversity grand, as I always like to say. They just can't help but bring their own flora and fauna with them, you know, their own fish that they like to catch from China, which end up becoming superfish and killing all the other fish, et cetera, et cetera. But, multiculturalism is just the most important thing. Only a wicked person could decry the death of the American chestnut. And what do we have in the chat here? We had 3 in our yard growing up, says Don Willis. The burrs, the pain, the agony, the terror. Older brother beating me each season. The cleanup, dad making us keep the driveway clean. The joy, eating them. I don't know whether I remember going to Stanley Park with my children years and years ago, around Christmas time when it was cold, and selling roast chestnuts. Yeah, delicious, actually. True Greenbird says, whenever I think of chestnut trees, I think of 1984's Chestnut Tree Cafe. That makes them creepy. Need to associate them with something more positive. Hopper said, best part of yesterday was the image of KMG navigating an icy Victoria sidewalk. Red Sulfur says, tree species often compete with each other, so they're not as nice as green freaks would have you believe. Okay. Jeffrey Pye, thank you for your kind words. Visionary Companion says chestnut trees are very prominent in Seattle. So what are we going to move on to now? Okay. This is a good one. I like this. You remember this fellow was canceled a few months ago? Morgan Wallen. I don't really follow country music, but this is a story of the Daily Wire by Amanda Prestigiacomo. Morgan Wallen lands best-selling album of 2021 despite deplatforming over secretly recorded N-word tape. Fox News reported Wednesday that Wallen's Dangerous, the double album, has sold 3 million copies, unexpectedly outpacing anticipated albums like Olivia Rodrigo's Sour EP and Drake's Certified Lover Boy. Back in February, TMZ published a video reportedly recorded by a neighbor showing the Dangerous singer using expletives and the N-word after a night out in Nashville with friends. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. In the aftermath, a solemn Wallen posted a video to his social media discussing the secretly recorded footage, admitting to fans that he was on hour 72 of a bender, and it's not something I'm proud of either. Obviously, the natural thing is to apologize further and continue to apologize because you got caught, and that's not what I wanted to do. Well, apparently, no one gives a toss. Okay, you got drunk with a bunch of friends, and you started imitating rappers, and again, nobody gives a toss. And I must say that this story is uplifting, like Jane Russell's Crush Your Heart Bra. This is from the Daily Wire by Megan Basham. Readers of the British newspaper The Guardian are accusing the outlet of deactivating an online poll that asked readers to vote on the Person of the Year after it became apparent that J.K. Rowling would handily win. Tell us, who is your 2021 Person of the Year? Ran the headline posted on December 15th with the subtitle, Time magazine chose billionaire Tesla boss Elon Musk, but who would be your choice? A short time later, when Rowling was far and away in the lead, the voting form disappeared, as did the results. A message in small print stated, this form has been deactivated and is closed to any further submissions. Rowling has been the center of numerous cancel culture storms this year for her refusal to deny the reality of biological sex. Earlier this month, she stirred up controversy by mocking Scotland's law enforcement policy that allows accused rapists to self-identify as female. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The penis individual who raped you is a woman, she tweeted in reference to an article titled Absurdity of Police Lugging Rapists of Women. Yes. Wow. It's pretty easy to be controversial these days, isn't it? As in, if a person has a penis, that means it's a man and not a woman, or only women can give birth or have uteruses or menstruate. Wow, pretty spicy stuff there. As the Daily Wire previously reported, trans activists have retaliated against her refusal to capitulate to their agenda by threatening to send her pipe bombs and publishing her home address on social media. Showing the flair for dark humor that runs through her novels, the world's richest author Riley joked that she's received so many death threats she could paper the house. The Guardian, which is generally known for being left of center, yeah, you could say that, has so far provided no explanation for why it took its poll offline with Rowling firmly in the lead, but that didn't stop the public from taking to social media to share their suspicions. And yeah, okay. In the You First category comes this story from Steve Wesson at Summit News. A professor at Vanderbilt University has argued that food authorities in the US and beyond need to follow the example of the European Union and make bugs, including maggots and worms, a staple of people's diets. In a piece published by Bloomberg, Professor Amanda Little argues that everyone in the world needs to start dining on insects. Little writes that the EU, quote, approval confers a kind of dignity to the lowly, protein-rich microbeasts that we foolishly dismiss as pests, and delivers a clear signal that the insect proteins industry is poised for significant growth. Above all, it paves the way for an alternative protein source that should play a crucial role in feeding a hotter, more populous world. Humans have been consuming edible insects, from crickets and grasshoppers to fire ants and termites, since before the dawn of civilization. And 80% of the world's population throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America continues to eat bugs today, unquote. Really? I don't believe you. And if these people, these desperately poor people, had a chance to eat meat, say, or even things like corn and potatoes, are we supposed to believe that they would keep on eating their bugs? So now in the category, you're not a black person if I say you're not, we have this absolutely bizarre story about a sportscaster called Sage Steele. Now, I have to admit that I never heard of this person until, today, but I don't watch ESPN. I haven't watched ESPN for a long time. Deadspin had tweeted, Idiot of the Year #6, Sage Steele, the Black Candace Owens. And I'm looking at a picture here from this tweet, since deleted, of Sage Steele, who was clearly a mulatto. Okay. Yeah, what's worse than being Candace Owens? Apparently being a sort of kind of black Candace Owens. This is from Brandon Contes at Mediaite. Deadspin slammed ESPN sportscaster Sage Steele as their #6 Idiot of the Year, but the initial story came with an idiotic headline of its own. Deadspin tweeted and published Idiot of the Year #6, the Black Candace Owens, according to numerous Twitter accounts that took a screenshot and shared the outrageous headline. The botched headline would imply that Candace Owens is not black, which is, of course, a false statement. The tweet has since been deleted, and Deadspin dropped black from the corrected headline, which now reads, Idiot of the Year #6, Sage Steele, the Candace Owens of ESPN. And we have a bunch of tweets here of people coming to the defense of Sage Steele. It would seem the reason why these people are so angry at Sage Steele is because she is half white and acknowledges that she's half white and doesn't hate white people. Yeah, shocking, I know. This is from October 6th, Evan Blyer at Inside Hook. I don't know, whatever that is. SportsCenter anchor Sage Steele, who was demoted to a less watched edition of the show earlier this year, has been removed from the air by ESPN after testing positive for COVID-19. The 48-year-old was vaccinated, but called parent company Disney's inoculation mandate sick and scary, and said she didn't want to get the jab, but did it in order to preserve her job. I respect everyone's decision, I really do, but to mandate it is sick and it's scary to me in many ways, Steele said during an appearance on the podcast of ex-NFL quarterback Jay Cutler, who is also an on-the-record anti-vaxxer. I'm not surprised it got to this point, especially with Disney, I mean a global company like that. Thanks to those comments, as well as some she made about former President Barack Obama, Steele may be out of work regardless. While speaking with the former quarterback, Steele started discussing Obama's racial identity for some reason and speculated that he would identify as black while filling out the U.S. Census because biracial is not an option. Congratulations to the president. That's his thing, Steele said. I think that's fascinating considering his black dad is nowhere to be found, but his white mom and grandma raised him. But okay, you do you. I'm going to do me. Listen, I'm pretty sure my white mom was there when I was born, and my white family loves me as much as my black family. Oh, and then Keith Olbermann decides to enter this controversy. And I was talking about pretentiousness before. No. We've got nowhere near the top. Steele's former colleague, Keith Olbermann, was less than impressed with what she had to say. Quote, when a year ago, I felt it was necessary to resume my political commentary. Ooh, a nation calls. I resigned from ESPN with a lot of time on my deal and a new one under discussion to save them any anxiety. I've seen others there threatened over opaque, accidental political references. Sadly, Sage Steele has a long rep there for trying to blow up the careers of co-anchors and other co-workers. Mind of an assassin, no aim, always wounding herself. But this stuff, especially the Obama part, is intolerable. They need to take her off the air immediately. Yeah. I'm reminded back in 2008 when Obama was running for president for the first time, and this discussion broke out in the black community about whether Barack Obama was black, because he's not a descendant of slaves, as they say. And this British comedian on a British panel show, this was brought up, and it was like, well, okay, you're black, so why don't you tell us, right? And he said, Barack's father buggered off as soon as he was born. Is that black enough for you? Rather shocking, the white panelists. But I guess you get a certain pass, depending on one's ethnicity. Here is an essay from Victor Davis Hanson at American Greatness. And I guess it's on the subject of what John Lukács called historical consciousness. And I don't think that it's possible to be a civilized person without any historical consciousness. I mean, even if it's serfs and slaves or whatever had historical consciousness of their own families, But now it's all ground zero. The past, why would we need the past? The essay is called The Ungracious and Their Demonization of the Past. Never in history has such a mediocre but self-important and ungracious generation owed so much, and yet expressed so little gratitude to its now dead forebears. The last 2 years have seen an unprecedented escalation in a decades-long war on the American past, but there are lots of logical flaws in attacking prior generations in U.S. history. Critics assume their own judgmental generation is morally superior to those of the past, so they use their own standards to condemn the mute dead who supposedly do not measure up to them. Yet, 21st century critics rarely acknowledge their own present affluence and leisure owe much to history's prior generations whose toil helped create their current comfort. And what may future schools say of the modern generation that saw over 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade, even as fetal viability outside the womb continued to progress to ever earlier ages? What will our grandchildren say of us who dumped on them some over $30 trillion in national debt, much of it as borrowing for entitlements for ourselves? What sort of society snoozes as record numbers of murders continue in 12 of its major cities? What is so civilized about defunding the police, endemic smash and grab thefts, and carjackings? Was our media more responsible, professional, and learned in 1965 or 2021? Did Hollywood make more sophisticated, enjoyable films in 1954 or 2021? Was there less or more sportsmanship among professional athletes in 1990 or 2021? Was it actually moral to discard the content of our character and equal opportunity principles of the prior civil rights movement of 60 years ago? Are the replacement fixations on the color of our skin and the quality of result superior? Would America have won World War II with the current labor participation rate of only 6 Americans in 10 working? Would our generation have brought all American troops home and quit World War I in fear of the deadly 1918 Spanish flu pandemic? Are we proud that most standardized tests of student knowledge and achievement continue to decline despite record investments in education? Do we ever pause to consider that we enjoy our modern standard of living and security because we were once a meritocracy that quit judging our workforce by tribal affinities and ancient prejudices? Our generation talks of infrastructure nonstop, but when was the last time it built anything comparable to the Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, or the California Water Project, much less sent a man back to the moon and beyond? If prior generations were so toxic, why do we continue to take for granted the moral and material world they bequeathed to us, from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to our airports, freeways, and power plants? Did we ever defeat anything comparable to the Axis powers or Soviet communism? We know the symptoms of the current epidemic of hating the past, Victor Davis Hanson continues. One is Orwellian renaming and statue toppling. Historical revision often responds to puritanical mob frenzies rather than to democratic discussion and votes of relevant elected officials. Where's the pantheon of woke heroes who will replace the toppled or defaced Thomas Jefferson and Teddy Roosevelt? Well, how about that Colin Kaepernick? I mean, sure, well, make him a hero. He's got really well. Colin Kaepernick is another example of, yes, he's half white by birth. His father abandoned him at birth, and he was raised by nice white people. But now, of course, he hates white people because white people are horrible, presumably like the nice white people who raised him. Whose morality and achievement should instead be immortalized? Were the public and private lives of Che Guevara, Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Margaret Sanger, and Franklin D. Roosevelt without sin? Racial fixations tend predictably in one direction. In good Confederate fashion, we lump all individuals who look alike into inexact collectives of white, black, or brown, often to stereotype the supposed evils of so-called white supremacy. But if we go down that tribalist and simplistic road of caricatured oppressors and oppressed, will future generations tally up each group's merits and demerits to adjudicate the roles of millions of individuals in making America worse or better? What standard would they use to judge our ignorant world of racial stereotyping, proportional representation in Nobel Prizes, philanthropy, scientific breakthroughs, or lasting art, music, and literature versus statistics on homicides, assault, divorce, and illegitimacy? Immigration, when legal, diverse, measured, and often meritocratic, has been the great strength of America. No, it hasn't. As typified by industrious arrivals who chose to abandon their own homeland to risk new lives in a foreign United States. Never in history has such a mediocre but self-important and ungracious generation owed so much and yet expressed so little gratitude to his now dead forebears. Victor David Hanson, I like him, but he doesn't understand that the Enlightenment is over. that the liberal era is over, that the age of reason is over. And there is no point in attempting to reason with savages, that the only thing savages understand is fear. Oh, yes, Thomas Paine. I don't think I would have liked Thomas Paine if I knew him. I don't, from what I know, I don't really like him very much. He was a God hater, but he was a brave man. And here we find this interesting story from the westernjournal.com by C. Douglas Golden. There are few things big tech loves more than censoring conservatives. They love your data. They love 12-day intermittent kale fests at Burning Man to purify their energy chakras or whatever. They love creepy metaverse demos where Mark Zuckerberg tries to pretend to be a human being while donning VR gear to enter a virtual world so useless and vapid. You get the feeling neo-Luddite media theorist Neil Postman was greatly understating things when he warned we were amusing ourselves to death. So Thomas Paine, yes, that Thomas Paine, the one who wrote Common Sense, the pamphlet that helped turn public opinion against the British in the run-up to the American Revolution. He's also not problematic in the post-reckoning sense, given that he didn't own slaves and railed against the institution of slavery in his other tracts, and that wasn't the only leftist cause he took up a pitchfork for. For instance, he's certainly not venerated among the religious right. Here are some choice Paine quotes on the matter of faith. It is from the Bible that man is learned cruelty, rapine, and murder, for the belief of a cruel God makes a cruel man. One good schoolmaster is of more use than 100 priests. I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish church, by the Roman church, by the Greek church, by the Turkish church, by the Protestant church, nor by any church that I know of. My own mind is my own church. If bumper stickers existed in the 18th century, Paine would have a coexist sticker on the left side of his horse and buggy and a focus on your own damn family sticker on the right. Post any of Paine's religious quotes to Instagram, and you're not going to find yourself in a whit of trouble. Colin Wright, managing editor of conservative-leaning publication Quillette, managed to find one Paine quote the censors weren't going to let fly. However, quote, "He who dares not offend cannot be honest," unquote. That 8-word quote went against Instagram's community guidelines due to it being false information, Wright said in a tweet Sunday evening. He quickly found out he wasn't alone. Received DMs from several people who tried to repost it, saying theirs got immediately taken down too. Give it a try and report back. People are still getting their posts removed on Instagram, and on Facebook, they're getting 24-hour suspensions for sharing that post. Instagram is owned by Facebook, or Meta, if we must use the Borg-like conglomerate's hideously bland corporate rebranding. So it's unsurprising the same poor judgment applied across both platforms. The Western Journal has reached out to Facebook for comment, but has not yet received a response. Former model and Bitcoin hype woman Jessica Vaughn claimed that Wright was just getting reported by people that don't like your message, and pointed to the possibility of a dystopian future in the metaverse where they can utterly demand a monoculture or remove us from the economy and social structure entirely. That explanation would be bad enough, but it doesn't account for why random individuals without significant followings, people who wouldn't get reported en masse by a digital mob, ran into the same problem. And someone called Sarah Fillmore tweeted a picture of Thomas Paine, and with the quotation, "He who dares not offend cannot be honest," removed instantly. As she reported, because your post goes against our community guidelines, and many such other examples are attached to this story. This is from Nicaragua at Red State. Lauren Boebert tricks the left into exposing Biden with a savage troll. We've started to see liberal media bringing up the questions of Joe Biden's incoherence and confusion after countless incidents. CNN's Jeff Zeleny pointed out that Joe Biden became confused when he was talking about COVID test kits and started calling them pills instead. It's all pills. It's a joke, isn't it? Biden corrected himself, but then again called test kits pills. Zelensky also noted that the kits weren't going to be available, if at all, for weeks, well after the Hollywood surge. Lauren Boebert, Republican of Colorado, tweeted, "It's almost the end of 2021, and I've yet to see Biden mobilize a triune-turn Attila depressure like he promised. What's the holdup?" Boebert was referencing this infamous statement from Biden back during the campaign. So a bunch of people on the left said, yeah, like this is all made up. It's fake news. And like, who cares that the president's mentally retarded? He must be a Nazi or something. My favorite bit was, just a couple of weeks ago when Biden was introducing inductees to the Kennedy Center Roll of Honor or whatever they call it. And he was listing previous names, and he said, famous name, famous name, famous name, and then meteor. He actually said that, meteor. This is from Kira Alfonseca at ABC News. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has declared racism a public health crisis, signing an entire package of legislation December 23rd aimed at addressing discrimination and racial injustice in the state. Quote, for far too long, communities of color, well, if you mean black people, why don't you just say black people, Governor, have been held back by systemic racism and inequitable treatment. I am proud to sign legislation that addresses this crisis head on, addressing racism, expanding equity, and improving access at all. Note here, she doesn't say equality, equity, because some people are better than others, and we know who those people are. And I mentioned yesterday that Dr. Robert Malone, the inventor of mRNA technology, has been permanently suspended on Twitter for reading government data. He responds on his Substack, we all knew it would happen eventually. Today it did. Over 500,000 followers gone in the blink of an eye. That means I must have been on the mark, so to speak, over the target. It also means we lost a critical component in our fight to stop these vaccines being mandated for children and to stop the corruption in our governments, as well as the medical industrial complex and pharmaceutical industries. So spread the word, spread this on your own Twitter feed or whatever social media venue you wish. And then he links to his Substack account. Yes, we want to listen to the experts. Oh, so we're hearing from about mRNA vaccines from someone who invented mRNA. He's a quack. He's a conspiracy theorist. He needs to be silenced permanently. And let's look at the Drudge Report. USA sets world record in Omicron, I guess. USA. Risks grinding to a halt. Why? Because people have colds? Golly, it's the end of December and people are coming down with colds. I can see how that would lead to the United States grinding to a halt. Hard to keep life operating. Top doc at New Jersey's largest hospital expects hospitalizations to surpass worst of 20. Golly, that's not happening anywhere else. First, they ran short of PPE, then ventilators, now staff. 600 cars in line at Missouri testing site, mile long in Colorado. Marines kick out 206 troops for refusing jabs. Airplanes cancel 1,200 flights. JetBlue trims through January. Woman tests positive mid-air. Coffee, tea, or test? Is that what happens on airplanes now? Insulates for hours in bathroom. Okay, yeah. Got to keep the panic going. Well, this is from Colby Hall at Mediaite. Dr. Michael Osterholm warned viewers of Morning Joe that a sharp spike in COVID-19 infections in the coming 3 to 4 weeks means we are going to have a hard time keeping everyday life operating. because there's too many people with cold symptoms. The director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota and a member of President Joe Biden's COVID-19 advisory board appeared on MSN Thursday morning to discuss the sharp rise in coronavirus cases brought about by the Omicron variant and new CDC guidelines that shorten the recommended time to quarantine for asymptomatic individuals following a positive test. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky, do you remember her? When she was sworn in as the director of the CDC, she talked about how scared she was and how it made her want to cry. That's exactly the sort of person you want in charge of things. She appeared on a number of television shows and was pressed on whether her decision to cut quarantine guidelines from 10 to 5 days was based on business needs or science. Yeah. Apparently, she's not panicking enough. Everyone needs to start panicking more. You're not panicking enough. And South Africa is especially not panicking. This is from Reuters. South Africa lifted a midnight to 4 a.m. curfew on movement with immediate effect as it believes the country has passed the peak of its fourth COVID-19 wave driven by the Omicron variant, a cabinet statement said Thursday. South Africa, which is currently at the lowest of its 5-stage COVID-19 alert levels, made the changes based on the trajectory of the pandemic, levels of vaccination in the country, and available capacity in the health sector. And I can't give you the numbers from Ontario because they're not made available today, sadly. Hopefully, they'll be available tomorrow, so I can laugh. I can laugh about all these people saying vax, vax, and vax again. In Quebec, which bids fair to be the Canada's Australia, this is from the Montreal Gazette. Quebec is reinstating a province-wide curfew, closing restaurant dining rooms and banning private gatherings beginning on New Year's Eve, Premier François Legault announced Thursday. The decision comes as Quebec continues to grapple with surging COVID-19 cases fueled by the more transmissible Omicron variant and an increasingly fragile healthcare network. Quebec reported more than 14,000 new COVID-19 cases Thursday, and Legault said more than 16,000 will be reported on Friday. The curfew will be in place from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and those who violate it will be subject to fines ranging from $1,000 to $6,000. So how bad is it in Quebec? 138 people in intensive care. 138 people in intensive care. So how many people does Quebec have? Let's just figure that out. Let's just check this out. 8.6 million people. And they have, 138 people in intensive care? Sure sounds like a crisis to me. What a bunch of sissies we have become. Oh, and speaking of the pivot on Omicron, this is from MRC TV. Even MSNBC's Chris Hayes is admitting what most of us have known, I don't know, for 2 years now, that COVID, particularly the Omicron variant, currently spreading like wildfire across the country, is basically the flu. If after 2 years of shutdowns, lockdowns, mask mandates, vax mandates, school closures, student mask rules, and the recent public ouster of unvaccinated people from the rest of society in our largest cities, this too little, too late admission absolutely enrages you, join the club. Quote, for the people who don't fall into that high risk category, and we're talking about 150 million people, maybe or more, those people who are vaccinated, particularly those who are boosted, the personal risk went from something we hadn't really dealt with before in our lifetimes to something that does look more like the flu, Hayes said Wednesday night on his MSNBC show, All In with Chris Hayes. Now, the flu can still be dangerous, kills tens of thousands every year, but we do not reorient our lives around the flu. Well, Chris Hayes is another one of those people who's not keeping up with the data or has seen the data, and I don't want to talk about that because it would make me look like an idiot. Omicron is a disease of the vaccinated. We see that everywhere in the world now. Oh, yes, the most sissified country in the world? Well, Canada dropped out, I don't know, in one of the early rounds. Which seemed to be Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Austria. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Australian Nazis freak out over 19-year-old who went to the club with COVID. 6-hour waits for a booster in Adelaide, the largest city in the South Australia territory. Oh, apparently some 89-year-old woman in Australia died of COVID, and the whole country is in a panic. Because it's not like, 89-year-old people die every day. This is again from Kane, retweeting Laura Ingraham, How to Create More Variants 101. Netherlands announces plan to give people up to 6 doses of COVID vaccine. 6. Are you vaccinated? Well, yeah, I'm fully vaccinated. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because you need 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And you can see how that is going to affect the statistics. It's really easy to figure out how this is going to. Yes. This is from the Twitter feed, New Grenada. 94-year-old woman has died with COVID. Mass hysteria throughout the country. Long lines, 6-hour wait for booster shots. Australia. Let's get that shot that in no way actually prevents us from being infected. But, we get it because, I don't know. I'm really at a loss here. People, as a rule, people don't like getting shots. So you have to get this shot because it's going to prevent you from dying. You have to get this shot because it's going to prevent you from being infected. Well, what if it doesn't do any of those things? Why would you want the shot? This is from disclose.tv. Just in, a Robert Koch Institute report released today states that 95.6% of the Omicron cases in Germany are fully vaccinated, and 28% of those have had a booster or third shot. Meanwhile, 4.4% are unvaccinated. But keep getting the vax, people. You need to, because if you don't, it would be like really embarrassing to certain people. And Pfizer and Moderna might make less money, and we can't have that. Let's check in on the panic porn. Let's see how it is. Vaccination stays the best thing you can do, says Bruce Arthur. Let's see. Eric Swalwell says, a man DM'd, I should be shot for my family's safety. I asked Twitter for help IDing him. When Twitter fell short, I asked the guy his name, stringing him a bit, and why he threatened me. Meet Jeremy Marshall, who told me he was radicalized by Tucker Carlson. Yeah, not at all a Fed. And it turns out he's from Vancouver. Yeah. Legault says we have to protect the unvaccinated from themselves. Vaccine pass required for places of worship. He is keen to expand it to everything. Bruce Arthur says, this is the game. It's not fair, but it's what it is. Who is getting infected, you little twit? The people who call themselves, defenders of science are now proudly admitting that they don't care about data. Because the argument from authority is the only thing that matters to them. Oh, more from Timothy Caulfield, who is Canada's most famous Bryan Singer lookalike. More on bizarre ivermectin cult. Great op-ed from Tim Caulfield describing the relationships between confirmation bias and identity on the uptake and spread of misinformation. Oh, the self-proclaimed event. He retweets someone celebrating the fact that Robert Malone, the inventor of mRNA, has been banned from Twitter. Let's go to Eugippius at his Substack. Virologist Christian Drosten, naturally acquired immunity is not like eating steak or something. Germany's foremost corona astrologer, Christian Drosten, ventures to lecture Twitter on the nature of human immunity. Quote, if you think you can train your immune system through infection, you must also believe that you can train your digestive system with steak. Seriously, immune response versus strong immune system is like learning versus intelligence. I can memorize a poem, but that doesn't make me more intelligent. I can survive an infection, but I have not strengthened my immune system. I'm amazed at how many misunderstandings and misconceptions exist surrounding infection, vaccination, and immunity. With a bit more knowledge, many here could avoid aggression and instead make better decisions for themselves. Eugippius responds, there's a lot that could be said in response to this drivel, the product of a truly mediocre mind, which is ever toying with incoherent metaphors and rejoicing in semantic victories. Everything Drosten says applies equally to immunity from vaccination, but he ignores that point because his real purpose is to cast indirect, implicit aspersions on immunity from infection. Of course, nobody should be surprised that the man who called corona a minor illness, a cold, on March 2nd, 2020, was just a few months ago saying quite different things. As late as September the 3rd, Drosten was still able to acknowledge that immunity from infection is more robust in the long run. My goal as virologist Drosten is I want to have vaccine immunity, and then on top of that, I want to have my first infection, my second, my third at some point. Eugippius responds, I don't know. That sounds an awful lot like training to me. Meanwhile, Markus Söder, Minister President of Bavaria, Christian Social Union, continues his disturbing totalitarian spiral with remarks made at a press conference just before Christmas. Quote, and with a vaccine mandate, we can also control this better. With a vaccine mandate, there is a clear option for control. Who is to be vaccinated, when and how, at what intervals and why. Then you can structure it much better and ultimately also try to get ahead of the waves instead of always running after them, unquote. This is the same man who recently told the magazine Bild that the coalition government should not be telling us what to eat in response to the demands from the Food and Agriculture Minister for higher meat prices. On Christmas, he voiced hopes that a vaccine mandate will help us overcome social divisions. Finally, the heavily vaccinated Icelandic parliament has been hit with a wave of corona infections, which started among the opposition parties and soon spread into the cabinet. 3 ministers have now tested positive. Run this incredibly stupid article through Google Translate to see how they're spending their time in quarantine. Finance Minister Bjarni Benediktsson is hard at work on a jigsaw puzzle. Science Minister Auslag Arna Sigborg Jornesdottir is eating takeout. And Foreign Affairs Minister Pordis Kolbrun E. Gildafdottir is hanging out with her cat. This is obviously a highly dangerous disease worth every inch of the social and economic destruction we have wrought in our futile attempts to control it. And let's go to Alex Berenson. Something that he said that I should have mentioned the other day, something that he wrote 2 days ago. This email just came in today from an old friend. The details are even worse than the headline. No subject. So my son's friend's father just died from the vaccine. Berenson comments, I'm 48 going on 49. Some tread left, or so I hope. Lots of help from dozens, no, hundreds of scientists and data analysts. And I promise the billionaire boys this. By the time I'm done, the world will know what you knew and when you knew it. This isn't about depopulation conspiracy theories. It's about a drug, not a vaccine. This isn't a vaccine by any reasonable definition. You rush to market with the promise of zero liability and tens of billions of dollars in profits. A drug that looks worse by the week. It's about risking the hearts of healthy kids to make morbidly obese adults feel a little better. It's about getting the result you want in the clinical trial after a few months and blowing up the trial for a drug that is supposed to be given to billions of people, and not once, but over and over. So yeah, I'm not going to forget. I don't feel pity or remorse or fear, and I absolutely will not stop until the truth comes out. Let the chips fall. And let's talk about, oh yes, let's go to Lockdown Skeptics. Formerly, dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. We need a conversation about the point of COVID self-isolation. The current system of testing and isolation does little to take into account the success of vaccines or the consequences of staff shortages, writes Professor Carol Sikora in The Telegraph. Omicron's lower death rate can usher in the end of COVID epidemic. This is from the London Times. Insulate British campaigner Tracy Maligan says she will not insulate her home. And then someone on TV called Claudia Lisa says you cost taxpayers $4.3 million and your home isn't insulated. Okay. Yeah, Britain has been, parts of Britain have been crippled in recent months by some group calling itself Insulate Britain. And yeah, that's how stupid Britain has become. EFL stops match day testing to prevent fixture disruption. Yes. We're testing. Oh my God, all of these people have it. Yeah, that's not good. So let's just stop testing then. Catching Omicron may protect against a Delta. Unvaccinated sports stars now unable to play in Italy. Australian medical experts say 3 booster jabs should be administered a year. Yeah, remember those good old days of 2020 when they told us that 1 jab would be enough? Now we're up to 3, and apparently we need 3 or 4 more. And it's not doing any good against COVID, but what that means is, in practice, that you really should get jabbed again and again. Case rates are currently highest in the most vaccinated U.S. states. U.S. government drops requirement to test at end of self-isolation because PCR tests produce so many false positives. Yeah. And let's go to the chat here. Let's go to the chat. Here we go. Hello to Moral Outrage Prophet, who says first one's free. Zen Master says he was pushing vax and now trying to get out of it. Oh, we're talking about Scott Adams here. Yes, I noticed that today. He said that the data was so faulty that it was the bad people got it right because the data was so faulty. Zen Master says Scott Adams trying to weasel his way out of his epic fail. Used to like the guy, but not after that. Texas Feral Hog says, if the only people getting sick are fat and old, and that group has 98%. Zen Master says they even have long COVID excuse for people who feel like crap after taking vax. They get an out for everything. Is today's show autobiographical? Asked Ricardo Williams. In what way? I wonder. I think you need to explain that. I'm genuinely bemused. Red Sulphur says Catholic schools used to teach impeccable handwriting. When I was in elementary school, which was 1,000 years ago, there was a particular method. It had McLean School, I think, where you had these, like copper plate, and you were supposed to imitate it. And you weren't allowed to use a big pen. You had to have a special pen, which was like one of those quill pens, only made out of plastic. I mean, it was really long. It was about this long. But I've always been terrible at handwriting. I don't know, because my hand crimps up. I started writing everything in block print from the time that I was in the 6th grade, because no one can read my handwriting and it hurts. I don't know. Perhaps there's something terribly wrong with me. Obama is light, bright, and 2 shades from being white, says Bob Casso 88. Red Sulphur says Angela Davis is almost white. Christopher Hitchens liked him a lot. That should tell you enough to not like him, says Anne Run of Victor Davis Hanson. Conservatism is stupid now. They're just pointing at liberals and mocking them. Pathetic, says Zen Master. Tribalism is already back. Too late to stop, it says Dr. Dead Name. Well, as I like to say, hello to Debreas, by the way. I mean, we didn't start this thing, okay? We were all good liberals, all colorblind, content of our character. And then the people on the other side said, we hate you because you're evil and there's nothing you can do about being evil. Oh, and by the way, all of the so-called accomplishments of Western civilization were either invented by non-white people or they're rubbish. You ever heard the saying about not pushing people into a corner? Well, that's what happened. That's what happened with this. Oh, let's talk about stupid things here. This is from Joseph Choi at The Hill. Germany will be shutting down 3 of its 6 remaining nuclear power stations Friday as it moves away from nuclear power in favor of renewable energy. In other words, we're going to have power and we're going to move to no power because there's no such thing as renewable energy. I'm quite certain that Germany probably has, 10 million windmills ruining the countryside and serving as bird abattoirs. But no, that's not going to substitute for reliable source of energy. The nuclear reactors in the cities of Gronde, Brockdorf, and Grunddemmingen will be shut down and disconnected on the evening of December 31st. According to S&P Global, the 3 plants combined had an output of 4.2 gigawatts. Germany's 6 nuclear power plants contribute about 12% of the country's electricity production, compared to 41% coming from renewable energy. Oh, I like more detail about that. 28% from coal and 15% from gas. Nuclear power doesn't, it doesn't create any of this horrible, carbon, which is supposedly killing the earth. So you're going to eliminate nuclear power, but still rely on coal power. Yeah, okay. I don't know what to make of these people. And in more stupid news, this is from Insider.com, Jacob Shamsian. In the middle of Ghislaine Maxwell's child sex trafficking trial, federal prosecutors quietly dropped their case against 2 jail guards accused of sleeping on the job and falsifying jail records as Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in his cell. Federal prosecutors in Manhattan signed a nolle prosequi, a document announcing to the judge that they wish to drop the case on December 13th. The document didn't appear on the court's public docket until Thursday, one day after Maxwell was convicted on charges that she trafficked girls to Epstein for sex and participated in sexual abuse herself. Prosecutors first filed charges against the guards, Tovat Noel and Michael Thomas, in November 2019. Prosecutors said the guards napped, caught up on the news, and shopped for motorcycles and furniture instead of doing their rounds at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Epstein was found dead in his cell on the morning of August the 10th, 2019, and New York City's head coroner ruled it a suicide. Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, hired his own coroner, who said the financier's broken neck bones were more consistent with a homicide. Noel and Thomas pleaded not guilty to the charges against them for falsifying records. In May this year, they entered a deferred prosecution agreement where prosecutors agreed not to bring the guards' case to trial until after they finished cooperating with an investigation into the circumstances of Epstein's death with the Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General. Okay. So these people weren't doing their job. Prison guards who weren't doing their job with regard to a prisoner who had recently been on suicide watch. In fact, the most famous prisoner in America. They goofed off and then they falsified records, but no, we wouldn't want to prosecute these people, which I'm sure has nothing to do with the fact that they are both ethnic minorities. And okay, let's go to Theater Thursday here, and I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite movies, which is from 1963, and is directed by John Sturges, and it is called The Great Escape. You often hear me say on Theater Thursday, that this film, whatever film I'm talking about, could not be made today. Well, this film could not be made today for lots of reasons. One, there's no women in it. And what else are we missing? Oh, yeah, we're missing sentimentality. There's no sentimentality in this film whatsoever. There's no happy ending in this film. There's no what is tiresomely called backstory, or what we used to call history. Well, let's hear about this, man's troubled relationship with his daughter who died. No, there's nothing like that. It's about men in a prison camp, in a German POW camp, which is based on an actual POW camp in what was then Silesia and which is now Poland. It's called Stalag Luft 3. And right from the very beginning, we see the prisoners. We see a bunch of trucks pull up to this newly built maximum security prison. Right from the very beginning, John Sturges shows us that these men mean business. And what is their business? Their business is to escape. That's what the movie's about. That's really all that the movie is about. The senior British Army officer Ramsey, played by the impersonable James Donald, says, Colonel von Luger, it is a sworn duty of all officers to try to escape. If they cannot escape, then it is their sworn duty to cause the enemy to use an inordinate number of troops to guard them, and their sworn duty to harass the enemy to the best of their ability. I guess this is a very old-fashioned film in some ways because, well, it's about gentlemen living in a world of honor. Now, we get a brief glance of Russian POWs who have been turned into slave labor. And the reason for that is that Stalin refused to sign the Geneva Convention. And I remember, and some of you may remember as well, that during the ridiculous war on terror, people were making the argument, oh, the Geneva Convention, why do we want to protect these horrible foreigners? No, the reason that countries signed the Geneva Convention is not to protect them, it's to protect us. And so we see in the prison camp that these prisoners are treated quite well, actually. They're given decent food and lodging, and they're allowed activities, and they get Red Cross parcels. Russian prisoners didn't get that. In fact, Stalin's son was actually taken prisoner, and Stalin refused to ransom him, and he died. Very strange, very strange. But, there's a dilemma that comes up at the beginning of this film. The prisoners are all airmen, and this prison is run under the jurisdiction of the Luftwaffe. And we find out from the very beginning that the SS and the Gestapo think they're a bunch of softies. We need to be in charge. A lot of foreshadowing out there. And the case is made to the prisoners, a quite reasonable case, by Oberst von Luger. Why don't you just sit it out here? Okay. We're not going to harm you. And, what goes unsaid is if they escaped, they would almost certainly be put back into duty. So they'd be risking death again. All of these people were risking death. They were shot down. And Colin Blythe, played by Donald Pleasance, it turns out that he was, support personnel for the RAF in the rear with the gear, as they say. And he decided to, go on a mission, for fun. Didn't turn out to be so fun when he was shot down. No, these are men of honor, and their honor compels them to try to escape. And I've seen this movie many, many times. The first time I saw it, I suppose, on TV when I was about 10 years old, when I found it enthralling. You'll find people call this a boys' film. Yes, it is a boys' film, but it's a man's film as well, as I say, because it's about courage and honor. And watching this last night, the latest time, I was saddened by this. Is that what we used to be like? Because, Americans were brought into the film, particularly Steve McQueen, in order to sell the film to America. Essentially, the story is true. What we see in the film is true, although the characters are based on composites. Almost all of the prisoners in the real life, Stalag Luft 3, were British or Canadians. About 1/3 of the prisoners were Canadians. And you don't see a lot of Canadians in war films, actually. There's a film called The Devil's Brigade from about 68 or 69, which is pretty good. It's based on a true story, too. It's mostly about Canadians. But no, the Canadians are erased from The Great Escape. But the trueness of this story exists. I'm just, looking at men risking death, when there are soldiers with machine guns in towers watching them. And I'm now thinking, yeah, we burst into tears over the Omicron variant when, I don't know, not within my living memory, but, 80 years, less than 80 years ago, it was just taken for granted that there were ways that men acted, real men acted. And what do they gain by this? Well, as I said at the beginning, this film couldn't be made because it doesn't have a happy ending. The fact that the film doesn't have a happy ending, it made it more powerful to me, because these men weren't doing this because they were going to be victorious. They did what they did. They escaped or tried to escape because it was the right thing to do. And that's the only justification that they needed. This film was screenplay is by James Clavell, the famous novelist, and W.R. Burnett. It's based on a book by Paul Brickhill. And cinematography in glorious color is by Daniel Fapp. Excellent editing by Ferris Webster. And of course, one of the most famous movie themes ever by Elmer Bernstein. This film is distinguished for many reasons, one of which is the cast. Steve McQueen, who had previously appeared along with James Coburn in Sturgis's movie just before that, The Magnificent Seven, stars as Virgil Hiltz, the Cooler King. Apparently, Steve McQueen had enraged Yul Brynner on the set of The Magnificent Seven because he was a master of drawing attention to himself, even when it's not supposed to be a scene. And McQueen in The Great Escape was, why isn't there more of me in it? Why isn't there more of me in it? And this led to the famous motorcycle escape scene at near the end of the movie. And I have to commend Steve McQueen because there's a famous leap with a Triumph motorcycle. And McQueen was asked about it, and he said, no, that was Bud Eakins, not me. McQueen did all his own stunt work except for the biggest jump. McQueen is, I suppose, to a lot of foreigners who saw this film, Steve McQueen was, Mr. America. Just his coolness under fire, his willingness to accept punishment. I mean, the look in his eyes, everything about him says, I am not going to surrender to you. And his resistance to authority, well, we know how this would be played out in movies now in a very obnoxious way. But of course, this was a far more polite time. James Garner plays the scrounger, and I don't know. I've never seen anyone dress in a uniform with this white turtleneck. What is a white turtleneck part of any military uniform I've ever seen? Uh, Again, I'm really taken back by this movie because the idea that, oh well, we'll figure it out. Well, we can do practically anything. Now, this is a group of men, and they find people who can do practically anything, and this actually happened. The assumption now is that men are, hopeless, except that I don't know, playing video games, surfing the net. But you find all of these men, these British and American men in this film, who actually know how to do things, physical things. Richard Attenborough plays the Big X, and he is the man who is notorious for planning escapes and for taking part in escapes. And he is warned by the Gestapo right at the beginning of the film that if he attempts one more escape, he will be killed. Now, that's against the law. It's against the Geneva Convention. But again, you see this division in the Germans in this film. You have the Luftwaffe, who, as I say, are honorable men, and you have the SS and the Gestapo, who are just savages. And there's really something old school, that this is a caper. This is a movie with a savagely tragic ending, but it all seems so lighthearted at the same time, which is a good trick to pull off. You have James Donald, who I previously mentioned. You might remember him from Bridge Over the River Kwai. And he plays a far more likable character in this film than he did in that one. That he is the senior officer, but he acknowledges that Richard Attenborough's character, the Big X, is simply better at this escape business than he is. So he lets him have his way. I suppose this is one of the first, well, this is an ensemble cast. A lot of the people in this film became stars as a result. And I suppose one of them would be Charles Bronson, who plays a Pole named Danny Walensky, the Tunnel King, they call him. Now, Charles Bronson was not a Pole, but he was a Lithuanian, which is pretty close. And this is not so much a tough guy role as the one he played in so many movies. He's a man of great physical bravery, but we learn that he suffers from a near crippling claustrophobia, and digging tunnels is the absolute last thing that one would want to do if one suffered from claustrophobia, but yet he goes ahead anyway. Now, James Garner's character, Bob Hadley, the Scrounger, develops this really sweet relationship with Donald Pleasance's character, Colin Blythe, the Forger, and they're opposites. That he's a bird watcher, and oh well, you kill birds, James Garner. No. I watch them. I watch birds. You have bird watchers in the United States? Pleasance asks. He says, well, a few of them, indicating, that he thinks that this is a sissified thing to do. But Pleasance's character, he has this remarkable ingenuity at faking documents. And as I say, there's a very close relationship that forms, and this becomes really touching because we see that Donald Pleasance is losing his eyesight throughout the film, and he becomes, legally blind, I suppose you could say, or worse than that. And so, no, he's disqualified from the escape attempt. And James Garner says, so long as he's with me, he's not blind. James Coburn, who, of course, was the knife thrower in The Magnificent Seven, he plays an Australian called Louis Sedgwick, the manufacturer. And I don't know that casting actually works all that well, or particularly his accent. Hans Messemer is the Oberst von Luger, and he is quite good. David McCallum, in one of his earlier roles, this is before the band from Uncle, is Lieutenant Commander Eric Ashley Pitt. And you see, it's difficult in ensemble films for people to stand out. But in this film, it finds different skills for all the different. How can you contribute to a massive escape attempt? 250 people. And when Steve McQueen finds out from the big axe, he says, you must be crazy. 250 people? Well, it turns out the big X really hates the Nazis, and he is determined to pull off an escape attempt that is so big that the amount of resources that would be required to capture everyone would be a significant detriment to the Nazi war effort. We have Gordon Jackson, who's in charge of intelligence. Plays a character called Andy MacDonald, the Scot. You might remember him. He was so good in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie as one of Jean Brodie's lovers. Another Scottish actor, Angus Lenny, and who partners up with Steve McQueen, Virgil Hilts, right from the very beginning. And he's desperate to escape. And I don't know, one could say that he lacks discipline. And he comes to a sad end. This is a long movie. It is 172 minutes. But of course, how long was Aquaman? Wasn't Aquaman longer than that? I don't mind movies being long if there's lots packed into them, and there is lots packed into this. I said previously that there's nothing superfluous about this. Pretty much every scene is necessary to push the plot forward. And, of course, we learned something about the characters and we're attracted to the characters, but this is an extraordinarily plot-driven movie. You don't have a, 5 or 10 minute scene where, someone's talking about their feelings. No, it's about getting the job done. There was a survey some years ago in Britain. As mentioned previously, the Brits love to watch television movies on Christmas Day. This film, The Great Escape, came in third amongst all Britons as the one that they would choose to watch on Christmas Day. But among men, it ranked first. And I'm really not surprised. I'm really not surprised at all that Hollywood now seems to make movies that wants people to feel sorry for themselves. That's not what men want to do, actually. Men see movies like this and they imagine themselves as one of the characters. And they think, when I was talking about Treasure Island, about Jim Hawkins, could I be as brave and resourceful as Jim Hawkins? Well, probably not. But again, watching The Great Escape, I think, could I be as brave and resourceful as any of these men? Given that the, escaping is risky and that the alternative is living peacefully until the end of the war. Well, painstaking research is done into how to get out of the Stalag. And it turns out they were a little short in their measurement of how many feet that they would have to dig. And so they're exposed to the watchtower as they get out. Now, it was supposed to be 250, but instead I think it was 76 that managed to escape. So I guess the film is essentially in two acts. There's the planning and then there is the escape. And, unlike in Hogan's Heroes, say, where some foreigner can pretend to be a German in Germany, it turns out it's rather harder than it looks. Of the 76 who escaped, actually 3 actually made it through. 50 of them were murdered. And I use the word murdered deliberately on the express orders of Hitler. And this was such a shocking thing that it outraged the world. And it led to a British decision that everyone involved in these murders would be hunted down and subjected to exemplary justice, which happened. Now, that's not in the film. Again, a weaker film would have included that. Oh, well, their sacrifice was worth it because the people responsible for the murders got punished. No, this movie isn't about that. It's about a task. Again, it's a very long movie, almost 3 hours long, about a group of men planning and trying to accomplish a task. And I find it absolutely thrilling. I did as a boy, and I find it absolutely thrilling now. But as I say, it gives me pause. These men are what we used to be capable of, and what are we capable of now? But you don't need to worry about that. The Criterion Collection has an outstanding print of this available with many, many extras, 2 commentaries and documentaries and the like. And I would say, I've been asked, what books would you recommend for children? And I'm kind of at a loss because any book that I would recommend would probably be quite old. But I can unreservedly recommend 2 films by John Sturges, The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, which are perfect for children, especially boys, because they're simple tales of good versus evil. Let's have a look at the chat. British American says, the part, especially near the end, where the scrounger helps the forger is very moving indeed. Yes. Kevin, better movie, The Great Escape or Day of the Jackal? As much as I love The Great Escape, I'm going to have to go with Day of the Jackal. Day of the Jackal is a perfect film. It is absolutely perfect. Anwar says, but the camp Germans weren't really evil. No, that's true. They're not. But we have in the background lurking, and again, this is well foreshadowed by Sturges. In the background, we have lurking the SS and the Gestapo. And they're looking, the longer Hitler's regime went on, the more brutal and murderous it became. Lamprey Milt, hello, says, wow, crazy you say this is good for boys. This was my favorite movie when I was about 8. They were in the safest place in Germany. Why try to escape, says Texas Feral Hog? Because that was their duty. How did they sleep with all those missing bed slats, and how did the Germans not notice during routine inspections, says Anne Run. That sort of criticism is made of this film, People find a way to escape. Unless, of course, you're in the Hanoi Hilton, and you're beaten half to death on a regular basis. But even in prisons with cameras everywhere, people find ways to escape. It's not how long a movie is, but how long it seems, says Palmcasso88. Yes, I reminded people complained that Martin Scorsese's Casino is 3 hours long. And Scorsese said, but it's a quick 3 hours. And it is a quick 3 hours. Annerin says, Sturgis wanted Richard Harris for the Big X role. Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking Harris might have been too big of a personality for that role. Is McCallum the last surviving cast member? I don't know. Didn't McCallum and Charles Bronson share a wife? Have I got that right? They were both married to the same woman. Wouldn't that be rather awkward? Yeah, she used to be my wife, and now she's your wife. Yeah. Do you know that he was a singer, David McCallum? That he starred as a boy in Benjamin Britten operas? Yeah. How about that? Okay, so David McCallum was married to Jill Ireland, and I'm looking at her Wikipedia picture here. Golly, what a cutie. So she was married to David McCallum from 1957 to 1967, and she married Charles Bronson in 1968. Whenever I see the years like that, divorced 1967, married 1968, I think adultery. That's what comes to mind. Jill Ireland. Golly. Yes, he stole her during the making of this film, says Anran. Okay. British American says the lovely Jill Ireland. Yes, she was indeed lovely. Texas Feral Hawk says the more the war ran on, the more brutal everyone got. Yes, that's true enough. That is true enough. But The Great Escape is better than the loose 1997 remake, The Jackal, starring Bruce Willis as media hits. I don't. Okay, it's like pitch meeting. You got a remake for me? Yeah, we're going to remake Day of the Jackal. Why would you want to do that? This movie is perfect. There is nothing that you could do that would be better than the movie that's already been made. There is no slant that you could put on it that could possibly be more interesting than is in the original. You want to make a movie where you take an assassin and essentially you make him a hero, and he's got something going on. He's got some sort of plot, and he meets with all these people in furtherance of the plot, and you don't figure out what it is that he's actually doing until the last 15 minutes of the movie. Do you think you can do better than that? How about the last 15 minutes of Day of the Jackal is essentially silent, without dialogue? Do you know how good you have to be at making movies to do that? Anyway, I think I'm going to wrap it up now. Tomorrow is the book club, and I'm going to be talking about a book by Pierce Paul Reed. I think this is maybe the third book by him I've discussed on the book club, and it's called Ablaze, and it is the true story of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. A really remarkable book, and Pierce Paul Reed has written many remarkable books, but reading this book about Chernobyl, it just, if I could give someone like one book to explain, how lousy and screwed up Soviet communism was, it would be this book. Yeah, we're going to build a nuclear reactor. Well, no, we can't possibly have it ready in time. It will be ready on time. We don't really have, the right equipment, and what we've got is shoddy. It will be ready on time. But what if something, we'll worry about that later. Okay? Just get it done on time. Hey, I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.